Alright guys, welcome to the channel, welcome back to the channel. I'm Andrew Wolfe, and today we're going to be talking about Boulder, Colorado, and specifically, the big question of renting versus buying in 2026. Which is the better option? Spoiler, it's going to come down to your individual situation, but let's talk through some general ideas and see what might be the best fit for you. Alright guys, so why does this rent versus buy question really matter in 2026? Well, there's a lot of things that are shifting, right? So you have pricing changes, you have mortgage rate, interest rate changes, you have lifestyle changes when you're considering moving to a new city in general. So it's really important to assess what are the pros and cons of buying or renting for you and try to figure out the best fit for your individual situation. All right, guys, so let's start off with a high-level overview of Boulder's housing market. Now, I do have videos that dive into this a lot deeper, so go ahead and explore those. Or if you want to talk about your individual situation, let's connect directly. But at a high level, Boulder is going to have higher than average rental costs and higher than average purchase prices compared to the whole country, but also here in Colorado, right? So there's a few factors that go into that. Number one being, there's not a ton of options, right? So Boulder is going to have reduced inventory relative to some of the neighboring cities like Denver, and it's also going to have higher demand, right? A lot of people want to make Boulder their home for lifestyle reasons. You have students that you're competing with. You have a lot of people that choose to live here or forced to live here based upon their situation, and it really muddies the market and makes it a really competitive situation, and that all leads to higher price points, along with the limited availability to expand and build new housing options, right? So Boulder's really committed to, if you're going to grow, they're going to do it sustainably, and they're going to do it in a way that doesn't distract from the natural beauty of Boulder. So all of that kind of leads into the cost of living being, just generally speaking, higher for both renting and for purchasing. So what does renting in Boulder look like in 2026? Well, it's a fairly common choice for a lot of people who choose to make Boulder their home or who are moving here as a new person who hasn't lived here before, right? People do it for all sorts of reasons. They haven't lived in Boulder before, they're unsure of which neighborhood is going to be a best fit, they're unsure what their commute looks like to work if they're not working remotely. So that definitely factors in, right? There's certainly going to be a lower cost of entry, at least, to put a down payment on the market and to buy a home, right? Renting is a little bit easier, looking at a deposit and an application fee versus having to put down a percentage of the total cost of the home. So that can definitely be a factor as well. And also sometimes people like the flexibility of, maybe this is a new job for them and they're only going to have a one-year contract. They want to explore their options, so locking themselves into a long-term mortgage may not be the best fit. So renting is not worse than buying. It's just got to be the right choice for you. So those are some factors that might weigh in. Now, average rental cost is certainly going to vary, right? And these numbers can be volatile, so don't, throw rocks at me in the comments if they're a little bit off at some point in the future. But as we sit here in early 2026, you're going to see, studios on average are going to be, $1,600 to $2,100. One bedroom's $1,700 to $2,200. Two beds, $2,400 to up in the $4,000 range, potentially. And then three bedrooms are typically going to start in the $3,500 range per month. Now, those are just the rents. That's not, generally speaking, going to include things like utilities and parking, certainly not internet, so there's going to be increased cost outside of that. Also, might be able to find something a little more affordable that's not quite as new. You might pay a little bit more for something that's newer and a little more walkable area. So there's a lot of range there, but generally speaking, that's what you're looking at for monthly cost to rent. So those are not small numbers, those are not easy numbers to swallow, but those, generally speaking, don't come along with the same initial upfront cost of buying a home. All right, so those are the costs. Now, what are some pros that help people choose to rent? Well, you certainly get a lot more flexibility, right? So you're in there for 1 year, let's say, as an example, but generally speaking, just the time of your lease. And you can also break your lease in a way that you can't just stop paying your mortgage, obviously. You're going to have much less responsibility as far as upkeep and maintenance is concerned. If something goes wrong with your rental home, you simply call the management company or your landlord and say, hey, this thing is broken, can you please fix it? And you're generally speaking going to be accommodated. And obviously the biggest thing is going to be just the upfront cost of renting is going to be much smaller. So you're going to pay, your application fee, you're going to pay some sort of deposit, generally speaking somewhere between a few $100s and 1 month's rent, and then you're going to be able to access your home fairly quickly as well, right? So if you're going to a purchase contract, at a high level, those generally take a few weeks. I would say somewhere between 3 and 5 weeks at a high level. But if you have an apartment that's immediately available and you qualify, you can probably move in the next day or within a couple of days for sure. So a lot of those things lead to people choosing to rent. Now, what are some cons? Well, at a high level, we're going to have generally rising rent costs, right? So like we talked about, they're not building a ton more of housing here in Boulder, but people keep moving here, right? A lot of the housing is seasonal due to the college being there. Not that you can't go rent something at any time of the year, but oftentimes you're going to see a higher influx of people moving in and therefore more competition around the school year. You're also going to see obviously no return on investment since you're doing renting. And I know people often talk about mortgage rates being a barrier to buying a home. That is very, very true, but there's workarounds for that. And anytime you're renting, you're basically paying a 100% interest rate because you're not getting any return on those dollars in the long run. So those are some cons, right? So you got to balance all that out and see if renting is the best fit for you. At a high level, generally speaking, renting is better for people who need housing immediately, are unsure of their long-term place in the Boulder marketplace, or if they just want to kind of avoid some of those upfront costs, or maybe plan ahead and figure out buying in a different neighborhood or something in the future. So what does buying look like in Boulder? Well, generally speaking, you're going to be looking at smaller footprint single-family homes, townhouses, and condos, right? So if you get into Boulder County, you can certainly get larger square footage or even acreage, but in Boulder proper, generally you're going to be looking at a little smaller square footage for the dollar. Now, single-family homes are certainly going to be on the higher end of the pricing scale relative to the whole country here. Average purchase price for a single-family home right now is about 1.2, maybe 1.4 million. Now, you can certainly find something more expensive and certainly find something less expensive, but that's going to be your average. If you want something a little more affordable, an attached property like a townhouse or a condo is probably going to be a better bet. You can, generally speaking, get something in the mid-5s there, up to about the $700,000 range, and again with outliers on either side of those averages. So what are some pros of buying a home versus renting? Well, you certainly get long-term stability, right? There's not an option if you continue to pay your mortgage. That's generally speaking not going to change or fluctuate in the same way that rents are likely to. No one can kick you out of your house, right? Versus if you're in a rental and that person wants to sell their home, or if they or themselves or a family member want to move into that home, with proper notice, you do have to leave and allow them access to their home because they own it. Also, the biggest benefit, in my opinion, is going to be the long-term equity growth you're generally going to experience here in Boulder. Of course, there's exceptions to every rule, but Boulder, like we've talked about, has performed very, very strongly in the long term for getting return on investment for home buyers. So if that long-term planning is going to be a big deal for you, or if you're going to be in Boulder for, let's say, 5+ years, buying is something you should really, really consider to capture that equity in the long run. So what are some cons to buying? Well, we've talked about kind of the higher entry costs, right? So you're going to have generally some sort of down payment, or even if you're paying cash for your home, obviously there's a lot more money up front. You're also going to absorb all those maintenance responsibilities, right? So if you own your home and your refrigerator stops running, it's on you to buy a new refrigerator. Now, I take care of all my clients in the form of a home warranty that can really help mitigate or eliminate those costs, but not everyone has that option, and not everyone continues to have it after the first couple years of owning their home. So it's important to factor that in. Energy costs are also on the rise, right? So those might get absorbed or dispersed between other renters in like an apartment or a condo situation. But if you own your own home, you're going to be responsible for any increase in gas or electric costs that we might see here in Boulder County and throughout Colorado. So I would say there's an important to take a couple of views of this. You have to take the lifestyle view and the cost view. And the cost view is the easier of the two to analyze, right? So if you were considering moving to Boulder, Colorado, I would suggest connecting with a lender that you trust. And I'm happy to connect you with a great local lender that knows this market inside and out. And I'm happy to kind of identify a few sample properties for you that might be good fits for you based upon your individual situation. And then the two of us can come up with, a monthly cost breakdown of what it's going to be for principal of your home, the HOA cost if applicable, the insurance cost, all that good stuff, and lay out a pretty decent monthly cost expectation for you to evaluate. And then we can also identify a couple of rental options, maybe an apartment in a privately owned rental, and do the same thing. And you can see how those costs are going to equate out in the mid and long term. Another thing to think about too is going to be the lifestyle. So where do you want to live? If you're just moving to Boulder and you want to insert yourself in the community in a great way, the location you live in is going to be a big factor for that, right? So you have to evaluate the lifestyle you want to live versus the cost you want to absorb, and then of course that all is going to help you factor in whether renting or buying is best for you in 2026. So guys, we talked about a lot of great reasons to consider renting versus buying, and it's important to weigh all those factors in, but there's also ways to think outside the box. If you are really, really committed to buying and you're going to be in the Boulder area for a few years and you want to see that return on investment, but Boulder's prices still are a little out of touch, there's great local towns that are very, very close by that let you live that Boulder lifestyle without paying the Boulder price tag. Niwot, Gun Barrel, Longmont, Louisville are also going to offer really, really great options here. Generally speaking, they're going to be a little bit newer homes, a little bit larger homes as well. With that lower cost, it might be a great fit or a great third thing to consider, right? Just moving slightly outside of Boulder to make it a little more budget friendly. So guys, I really enjoy making these videos for you guys. I am happy to help down and sit with you guys and analyze what is the best option for you, renting versus buying. Just go ahead and reach out to me and let me know. You can give me a call, text, email, all that information should be on your screen here. But you can also go ahead and leave a comment. I'm happy to connect with you there as well. Hope you guys have a great day.